So I thought what we could do first is just to settle in a bit. Let's just sense into the body, just directly see if there's any sensations that we can just take note of. We don't need to change anything, but just take note of however the body is sensing itself at the moment. So, you know, just the sensation of sitting in the chair, the sensation of breathing, bringing air into the body. Just feel how the body moves with the in-breath and out-breath. Might just sense into how the body responds to that freshness of air. So if we're just breathing naturally without trying to manage it in any way, we can notice that there is an in-breath and then there's almost an imperceptible moment when the out-breath begins, and the opposite at the other end of the breath. So we can just notice that very subtle transition from in-breath to out-breath, out-breath to in-breath. Again, we're not trying to manage anything. We're not trying to conceptualize anything. We're just noticing the direct sensation, whatever that might be for you. So as we're sensing into the body, we might also notice any tendency of the mind to bring in things from the past, even the really recent past, like perhaps the supper you just had or what was happening today. And we can just realize that in this moment, we can just let that be. We just let that tendency of the mind to recall things, to populate the present moment. We can just see that tendency and just let it be. I'm not trying to make anything go away. We're not trying to change anything. We can just notice, yeah, there's the mind doing what it tends to do, you know, pull things into current memory. And just notice that. You can also notice any tendency to move beyond this moment. Just any tendency of, well, what's next? How can I improve on this moment? You know, what's the next piece of interesting content? When is he going to say something important? Whatever our mind is wanting, that's something somehow different than however this moment is showing up. We just notice any tendency of wanting this moment to be any different than it is. So here we are sitting in a quiet room, not much is happening. Body's still alive, still breathing, still sitting in the chair. And we can just notice this aliveness, just this simple sense of, even though not much is happening, just this simple sense of existence, simple sense of I'm here now. I may not know what any of that means, the I or now or here, but there is that sense of, yes, there's something that I can say about this moment, is that I am here to be present for it. My mind may be trying to pull me away from it, but regardless, I am still here. If I don't require the moment to be any particular way, even when the mind comes in and wants to pull me this way or that way, it's still the present moment. If we don't feel like it needs to be other than that, there's actually not a problem. We can notice any tendency that the mind has to want to understand what's happening, to make a concept out of it, put a bow around it so we can have something we can hold in our hand. We can notice any movement in the mind that wants to attain something better, more exciting, more spiritual. Compared to what? Compared to this moment. Right? As if this moment is somehow deficient. And when we notice these tendencies, they might be subtle or they might really take us for a ride, but in any case, just noticing that tendency to pull us away from just this sense of simple beingness. We're not opposed to that. We're not trying to make that be different. It's actually not a problem. We just see it. Okay, there's the mind doing what it does. Not a problem. In fact, it gives us another opportunity to see how the mind is working. Okay, everybody good with that? So I thought what we could talk about tonight is the present moment. We've all heard that there's some special, spiritual benefit to being here in the now, right? And in some spiritual circles, it's a matter of trying really, really hard to be in the now, be present, be here. But when we really stop to look at it, there's never been a single moment in our entire life when it has been other than now. Yeah. So there's certainly lots of times when we are remembering an event that happened in the past, but the only time we remember that is in the present moment. And we may imagine what may or may not happen tomorrow, what we hope will happen, what we are afraid might happen tomorrow. But even that can only happen in this present moment. So whatever effort we're making to try to be in the present moment, we are stuck with the absolute certainty that never in our entire life have we been anywhere else but in the present moment, including this moment and the next one. So when we start to look at this, the way we've sort of structured how we view time, some of it's predicated on, what we're taught in grade school about the English language. That there are three tenses. There's the past, the present, and the future, and they're all sort of given equal footing, equal reality. But when looking at it more closely, what we call the past is recollected only when we remember it back into existence. If we don't remember it, like ever, because it was insignificant, or just it faded over a period of time, and we no longer are able to recall it into current consciousness, there's really not that much difference between not being able to recall it at all and it never happening. We're sort of led to believe that somehow there's a repository of past events that we can go to that's fixed, that they're on record. And I know I've heard about Akashic records, etc., but I'm just talking about our own direct experience. Maybe that is your direct experience, but for most of us, the sense of past in our everyday life, unless we recall an incident into current memory, it doesn't re-enter our lives. It's as if it never happened. There's also, when we look back on our lives, especially as we get older, but even while we're younger, we imagine that there's a linearity there. One event after another, a continuous lifespan. We can tell a story to our friends. But when we stop and actually try to remember a specific incident within some time period, 5, 10, 20 years ago, we may remember sort of the general things that we were doing, how we were employed, where we were living, who our family members were, general facts about our life. But to recall, with real specificity, a particular event, almost like you could watch it as a video, to recall it with that kind of detail, like, okay, I was there, this is what was said, this is what was happening. To recall it with that kind of detail, those events are relatively few. I mean, there can be days, weeks, months, maybe even years, within which we can't recall a single event with that kind of specificity. So we interpret a continuity of events one after another that create our storyline, which then we believe is fixed. But when we go to recall it, we see that it's actually just a memory here, a memory there, and we somehow string it together and fill in the gaps, and convince ourselves that there's a solidity there, the continuity, that's our life story. And it has sort of an inalterable quality about it. The other interesting thing that happens with our past is that this is true especially of sort of difficult situations, ones that we felt like we didn't handle quite well. We tend to replay those again and again in our head, and begin to imagine, what we could have said or should have said, and compared to what we actually said or actually did. And over time, that story begins to morph. So we're not quite sure what actually happened. It tends to be more like what we thought should have happened, or how it should have turned out. We sort of adjust that, and then over time, it becomes as real or more real than the actual event. Not that we intentionally falsify something to our own self. Well, maybe we do that too, but it's more like the tendency of wanting the events to conform to what we think we are. So it sort of shifts the story enough that it's sort of like in character to who I think I am, fits my self-image. So when we begin to look at it, the fact that the past requires our current memory to pull up into our current consciousness, a storyline. So we're also dependent on, the ability of our memory to do that and do that accurately. One of the things that seems to be common with all accidents that are witnessed or crimes that are witnessed is everybody has a little slightly different story. They're all there for the same event, all watching it, but when they have to write down exactly what they saw, the stories can vary quite a lot in terms of what different people were paying attention to, what was being filtered out through their own conditioning, their likes, their dislikes, their prejudices, all create a somewhat different memory of the same event. And so knowing that that's a common thing about witnesses of an accident or a crime, we may begin to suspect that maybe we're doing the same thing when we're present for a particular event. We color it, we see it in a different light, we see it from our own perspective, through our own colored lenses, through our own conditioning. So that too tends to begin to throw a little doubt on the solidity of this past that we usually feel quite certain happened as it happened. And we can talk about the future too, right? And one of the things that we can say about the future is that it never happens as we imagine it, right? We can plan, we can, come up with all these scenarios, positive, negative, what we hope will happen, what we're afraid might happen, 10 variations of each, play them through in our head, decide which is most likely, which is most scary. The future will happen as it happens, regardless of how we anticipated it. One of the things we can say with certainty about the future is that it will never happen. We will never experience tomorrow, right? When we get to tomorrow, it'll be today. So it's always today. Events change, sure. But the idea of the future sitting out there ahead of me is conceptual. You know, we tend to want to populate that to I mean, actually, that's sort of out of our distrust about life. You know, if we trusted life entirely to provide for us, to give us what we need to learn about ourselves and the world, to provide the circumstances that we need, say, for our own awakening, you know, we would relax about how the future is going to show up. But we tend not to do that. We tend to think, no, I need to be in control here. I need to manage this in order to have the outcome that I want. So by seeing the future in that way, we actually believe that we can do a better job of how events will show up in our life. We can do a better job of that than life. You know, we don't want to relinquish our apparent control of the future to something as unpredictable, unknown as life. I trust myself more than I trust life. Okay. But that's how we choose to act. Right? So I want to be clear here that I'm not saying that what we do in this moment has, you know, there's no benefit to plan. There's no benefit to do anything in this moment that may have an effect on the future. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I am saying rather than spending all our energy, psychological energy, you know, worrying about the outcome, being anxious about, well, will this happen or that happen, is to really take that same energy and just look at, okay, in this moment that is available now, what can I do? What can I choose to do that is feels like the most important thing to do in this moment? That's different than, you know, what can I do to get to some particular goal and worrying about whether that will or won't happen, because it'll never happen exactly as we hope or fear that it will happen. It'll happen as it happens. What we can do is use that energy in this moment and the next moment, and tomorrow when that now shows up, right, to do what we can in that moment. And that has consequences down the road, of course. But if we're doing it out of joy, out of love, out of compassion, out of our highest and best understanding of ourselves and life in each moment, that has consequences down the road. Without trying to manage the outcome, without trying to worry worry things into existence in some future time. So the future, when we really look at it, the future is a concept. It never happens. Never happens as we imagine it, maybe a little bit, maybe not so much. But I mean, we can all look back on our lives and, all the, dreams and hopes and anticipations that we had as 18-year-olds. For all of us, it played out differently than we hoped or feared or imagined. And that's part of the excitement of life, right? If we actually could control the future, right? And we just decide, okay, I want that, and step by step by step, and that would be my experience down the road. Is that really the life that we would choose? I mean, it's really, I would say that the things that have, I'll just talk about my own life. I mean, it feels like things that were unanticipated, surprising, startling, disappointing, new things that I didn't know I would ever be interested in. All of those things created a freshness in life that actually gave life a lot more aliveness than it ever would have had otherwise. If it was just the fulfillment of a set of goals. Yeah, how boring, huh? It might lead to a sense of safety, right? But, when we get, close to our final years and looking back and think, well, I played it safe and I didn't get into too much trouble. I mean, is that really our goal? Or is it more to live this life with a fullness? And sure, sometimes we'll get hurt. Sometimes we'll make a mistake. Making a mistake isn't a problem. It's actually an opportunity to learn. If we already knew it, we wouldn't have made the mistake. The opportunity is not to make the same mistake again. I love the expression, if I hadn't done so many stupid things, I'd still be stupid today. That's how we learn. We learn by being willing to take some chances, being willing to live life fully. And yes, sometimes we will get hurt. Sometimes we will be in error, say something foolish, say something inappropriate. Yeah. If we keep repeating it, yeah, that's a problem. But if we see it, see the impact of it, and that's registered, that's a function of our attention, our compassion for the other person. That gives us the ability to learn something from that. That wasn't appropriate. I'll endeavor not to do that again. So when we can see that the past is not quite as fixed and reliable as we may have imagined it, perhaps, and the future is totally imaginary. And in between the two, there's just this little point of transition, right, that seems to have no duration at all. We treat it as if it does. I mean, we talk about the present, right, like as if it were a noun, a thing, and we might grant it, well, it has, it's pretty short, but it still has some, discernible length of time in which things happen, and I can call that the now, and I can meditate on that. When we do that, we're still treating it as an object, right? We're still treating it as something that we are looking at, right? Like other objects, we're looking at the present. But it's not really that at all. I mean, we can't, it is not an object that we can stand back from and look at. It's too quick for that. Right? As soon as our mind tries to look at it, somehow we're introducing effort and struggle into seeing something that's already present, right? And we said before, this present moment is unavoidable. It's always the present moment. So any effort to try to be in the present moment is going to take us further away from it. Any struggle to be what we already are is going to take us away from that. Because it's just a conception. It's like, I'm going to improve me or my situation or my spiritual development by struggling to be now. Okay. But it's, you know, when we look at that, it's not really trying to be now, it's really trying to manage the content of now, the content of what's happening in this and every moment. That's actually what we mean by that when we said, well, I'll try to be more present. What we're really saying is, you know, I get that the present moment's always the present moment, perhaps, but I want it to be better. You know, I don't want all that mental activity, especially the kind that I don't like. Nice spiritual ideas, they're okay, but the sort of confusing, you know, self-degrading ones, you know, those I don't like so much. But that's all just managing content. Right? If we can really see that the issue really isn't the content, that regardless of the content, the present moment is still the present moment. You know, we might have the most arrogant, off-the-wall storyline running through our head, still the present moment. The usefulness is seeing the content for what it is. That which notices the content in the present moment isn't the content. It's something that notices the content. You know, that which notices the content is, you could say, our deeper nature. That which notices content. So we can ask ourselves, is the content dependent on consciousness? Or is consciousness dependent on the content? You know, it should be clear that the content may be whatever it is. Consciousness is actually unaffected by it. The content can drop away entirely, maybe for just a half a second, maybe for longer. Consciousnness is still present. So consciousness is not dependent on content. If this moment, our awareness in this moment isn't dependent on the content of it, we can sort of just pull our energy back from trying to manage that content. Our fascination with the content, for or against, it doesn't matter. Our fascination with the content is what perpetuates it, is what keeps it energized. It's what keeps the storyline going. You know, it's what keeps the self-criticisms going. all the blames and the angers and the unforgiveness, and all of those things are perpetuated by our belief in their reality. We give them power. But when we step back and realize, yes, that may be happening, that content may be happening, but there's something deeper, something closer, we'd say closer to home, right? Closer to my true self. I use that word lightly, but closer to my true beingness, let's say. Notices the content. Okay. If we're not trying to make it go away, we're not trying to change it, prove it, it is just what is arising in the moment, right? Doesn't even have any permanence. It comes, it goes. It doesn't define us. So this present moment, even though it feels like infinitely small, just this flash between, what we imagine the future, and then flash, and then the past. So there are these, it can feel like events are, flowing past me, one event after another. And that this present moment is infinitely small, impermanent, right? So in spirituality, a lot of times impermanence is presented as like a negative attribute of reality. Impermanence, birth, life, death, everything's impermanent. Yes, but that impermanence is a prerequisite for any kind of change, right? If for change to happen, whatever is present has to drop away for the next thing to arise. One event has to fall into the past for the next event to be present. One event has to die for the next to be born, you could say. So seen in that way, this impermanence is actually life-giving. It is actually what allows change to happen, growth. The seed, the acorn has to burst in order to grow the tree. It requires impermanence. So we can look at this present moment in one way, like this infinitely timeless transition between, what we think of as the future, and then happens, and then immediately becomes the past, so quickly that we can't even think about it. Any thought about an event that we consider happening in the present moment's already in the past. Our mind isn't that quick. Any thought structure, any conceptualization about what's happening, the moment's already passed. So we can also look at the present moment in another way, almost the flip side of that, as the present moment being unchanging. So always now, always the present moment. And what changes is what appears in it. The present moment has a solidity to it, you could say. Even though everything that appears within it is constantly changing, constantly impermanent. But what notices that impermanence, that constant changing of events in life needs to be, what notices impermanence is permanent, you could say. So which is it? I mean, is it infinitely small with events passing through it? Or is it just the one moment of now? With the risings and fallings within it. So you could say it's sort of like an analogy that we could use is, let's say you're sitting on a passenger train. You're in your seat, you're looking out the window, you're still in the terminal, and then there's a train on the adjacent track. And you begin to notice that the other train appears to be moving. Right? But then you wonder, well, wait a minute, is it the other train that's moving, or is it my train that's moving? Right? It's a bit like that, where without some other reference points, we can't really say, well, is it this, is it that, is the present moment just an instantaneous flash and it's gone, and then the next moment and the next moment of infinitely small time periods? Or is it just always now and events? It's the events that are changing. Yeah. But this is just the mind wanting to know, well, is it this or is it that? But when we allow ourselves just to experience it for ourselves, there's a bit of a mystery there. We don't actually know, well, is it this or is it that? The mind wants to know, but our direct experience is we have that experience of the present moment. But to try to conceptualize it, we already missed the point. You know, any attempt to sort of grasp it, hold on to it. You know, it's sort of like trying to grasp water. You know, just as soon as you squeeze it, it's not there anymore. We can't really hold it as a concept and step back from it and look at it, because it's not a concept. It's our direct experience, right? We all experience that sense of now. I'm here now, and you know, if we're not trying to manage it or conceptualize it or fill it with the right content, it's just that present moment within which everything happens. You know, it can feel like you know, almost insignificant, almost lost between sort of the immensity of, you know, infinite future out ahead of ourselves and, you know, long time past behind ourselves, and it can feel almost sort of lost, just that transition, momentary transition. But in a sense, the entire world, our entire life story unfolds within that presence. There's not too much we can say about it. We can, you know, sort of eliminate the past, eliminate the future, which hopefully we did. And we're left with this mysterious aliveness. Right? So there's consciousness present in this moment, and life happens now. So is this present moment different than consciousness? Again, the mind wanting to slice and dice, right? We can experience it, but trying to conceptualize it, understand it, figure it out, just isn't applicable. But when we can relax and just notice, yes, this present moment is here. It is always here. It is unavoidably here. What is it that is living this moment? What is it that's present for the next arising? Notice that we're not hanging on to anything. What arises, arises. What drops away into the past. Ramana had this instruction. He said, let what comes come, let what goes go, and find out what remains. So the events, the experiences, the thoughts, the feelings, all of that comes and goes. Not a problem. And we find out what remains. It's that simple sense of being here, now, aware, alive.